And as everybody knows, this is our last program for this mill session. But please note that Marty will be back in our winter mill semester. And I'm pretty sure that that will begin, well, I'm not going to quote dates yet, but the winter semester starts the week of January 25th. And Marty will be back, and he'll be featuring, is it famous New Yorkers, Marty, or is it just icons? Are they all New
No,
Yorkers?
I gave you the titles of the
Yeah.
lectures. I think
Yeah,
one of
yeah,
them
yeah.
is Urban Berlin.
But the overall theme, are these all New Yorkers?
Yeah,
Okay.
they
So
are.
we're going to talk about specific people, um, and their gifts and their talents, and from the stage and screen, right? Yeah, and maybe behind the stage and screen. But we'll announce all that coming up. But just so you know, Marty will be back with his great presentations, and we are ready to get started. Please make sure you're muted, and it'll sound a lot better if you keep yourself muted. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, and then Marty will address all your questions at the end, or your comments if you have any comments from Marty or things that you want to share. Marty loves to bring your experience to life. So, and sometimes they make it into his next lecture. So, without further ado, let's talk about the Bronx.
Okay. All right. The Bronx is in the house. The Bronx is in the house. There are three places in the world with the word "the" in front of its name: the Vatican, The Hague, and the Bronx. So as you can see, I tried to dress like I did back then in the Bronx. I had my pink shirt on, my vintage tie. The only thing I couldn't duplicate was a certain hairstyle they had back then. You needed a lot of hair on the sides of your head, and you would join it in the back. So that hairstyle was called a duck stairs. And as you can see, I don't have enough hair for a duck stairs. So I was born and raised in the Bronx on Vice Avenue. My friends and I were called the Vice Guys. In fact, Leon Trotsky lived on Vice Avenue at one time. He wanted to see what a typical American family was like before the Russian Revolution. So I grew up on Vice and Tremont at 177th Street between West Farms Road and Southern Boulevard, not too far from the Bronx Zoo, and a great deli, Wittgen's. Wittgen's had the best pastrami and rye bread in the world. So my building at Vice and Tremont was 5 stories high, walk up. My apartment was on the first floor. I had a courtyard with a dancing fountain. Some of the people on the 5th floor would take a cloth bag and they would attach it to a piece of rope. And they let it go through their window. And when it got to the ground, the grocery boy would put their groceries in the bag, and then they would lift the bag up and take it through the window on the 5th floor. This is hard to believe. I tell this to people today, can't believe it. Back then, doctors made house visits. They went to your apartment. My doctor came from Manhattan to our apartment in the Bronx. His name was Dr. Markowitz. I remember he came in a dark blue sedan, and he had this little black bag with him. I used to think his entire office was in that black bag. Today, you're lucky if your doctor returns your telephone call. And then in the corner of my building was a candy store, Jake's. Jake made the greatest egg creams. I go into Jake's and he'd say, "Marty, how you doing? How's your mother, your sister? How's your dad's back coming along? Don't forget, Marty, I have your spare set of keys to your apartment in my store in case you ever lose your keys." Back then, there was a sense of community, and I think that's something that we all miss today. When I got home from school, I did my homework, I had my milk and cookies, and then I went out and played one of the many street games. Johnny on a pony, flipping baseball cards, stickball. And when it was time for me to come in for dinner, my mother would open up the window and scream, "Marty, come in for dinner, dinner's ready." They didn't have cell phones back then. They used the open window approach. This was my grade school here, PS6, located at Vice and Tremont. My grade school went up to the 8th grade, so I didn't have to go to junior high school. The school is still standing. It's considered one of the building is still standing. It's considered one of the worst schools in the city of New York. You know, it's interesting, about 6 or 7 years ago, I found out the name of the architect of my school. His name was B.J. Schneit. The first wave of immigrants that arrived in New York were in the 1840s, and back then the schoolhouses were one-room schoolhouses with an outhouse in the back. In about 1890, they invented structural steel that they use today in today's construction. So B.J. Schneit was an urban school architect. He worked for the Board of Education, and he took advantage of this new invention, structural steel. So he built these schools higher, more windows, double staircase, recreation rooms, playgrounds on the roof. And today's urban school architects still use B.J. Schneiter's design in architecture. So this is my graduation picture at PS6. I'm 14 years old here. This is me right here. And the other day, I was looking at some of the names next to my name. Carolee Wasserman, Richard Nagler, Ronald Ackerman, Regina Krantz. And I wonder what happened to these people. What did they do with themselves? Are they still alive? I went to Facebook and I could not find anything out about them. And this was my autograph book at PS6, 14 years old here. I want to read to you 3 entries that appeared in my autograph book. To Martin, when you get married and your wife gets cross, pick up a bat and say, I'm the boss. Well, it didn't work out that way. I married a girl from Brooklyn, and in my marriage, I've always had the last 2 words, yes, dear. Here's the next one. 2 in a car, 2 little kisses. 2 weeks later, Mr. and Mrs. And the 3rd and last one. Remember the brook? Remember the time we played the hook? One who knows? Davy L. I still see Davy L. about every couple of months. He lives in Teaneck, New Jersey. And in my autograph book, I had a page called My Favorites. My favorite song when I was 14 years old was Goodnight, Irene. I'm gonna give you a few seconds to try to guess what group was famous for singing Goodnight, Irene. All right, get ready? All right, I hope you got it right. It was the Weavers. So what I'd like you to all do now is join the Weavers in singing Goodnight, Irene. B.J. Schneit designed the auditorium at Morris High School. It looks like the design for the Radio City Music Hall. And then at my school, Roosevelt High School, here's my graduation picture at Roosevelt High School. I'm 17 years old here. Roosevelt High School was on Fordham Road, and it was across the street from a White Castle. And several days a week, my friends and I would go to White Castle and have White Castle eating contests. Who can eat the most White Castle? 10, 20, 30, 40, and top it off with a milkshake. June Allison attended Roosevelt High School. And here's Assembly Day at Roosevelt High School. The boys would wear a red tie and a white shirt. The girls wore a midi blouse and a red pleated navy blue skirt. So Roosevelt High School closed in about 10 years ago, and the graduation rate when it closed was about 3%. The graduation rate when I attended must have been about 98, 99%. So someone told me now the building is still standing. It's not called Roosevelt High School. They have about 5 or 6 specialized schools in the building. This was my train station, a subway station at West Farms Road and 177th Street. You know, back then you would see people reading books in the subway, and you would see ladies knitting scarves and sweaters. You don't see that anymore. People aren't reading books in the subway anymore. Here's a typical scene in the subway, people looking at their smartphones. And what about this one? She's not even looking at a dog. She's just looking at a smartphone. My parents liked going to Pelham Parkway. We had to take the number 40 bus, and my mother loved shopping on Lydic Avenue. And we used to go to this great deli in Pelham Parkway, Levine's. They had some of the best pastrami in the world there. So back in 1639, a Swedish gentleman by the name of Jonas Bronck, B-R-O-N-C-K, settled here, and then the river was named after him, the Bronx River. And then in 1898, when the 5 boroughs of New York were consolidated to form the Greater New York, they named this area the Bronx after the Bronx River. So now I'm going to tell you about some of the people that used to live in the Bronx. We have Joe Vitolo. I'm going to come back to Joe. Some of the other people that lived in the Bronx was Stanley Lieber, the creator of Spider-Man, Hank Greenberg, Al Pacino, Colin Powell, Bella Rabzik. Oh, boy, can we use Bella Rabzik in Washington, D.C. today? She would straighten out the damn mess that's going on there. And what about Lou Gehrig? And one of the great film directors, Stanley Kubrick, Edgar Allan Poe, President John F. Kennedy, Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Lee Harvey Oswald, Ralph Lipschitz. Well, he couldn't keep the name Lipschitz, you know, he was being ridiculed by his classmates, so of course he changed it to Ralph Lauren. And getting back to Joe Vitolo, back in 1945, he had a vision of the Mother of God in an empty lot on the Grand Concourse. About 30,000 people from all over the world went to the spot where he saw the Mother of God. Life magazine called it the Bronx Miracle. Frank Sinatra sent a statue of the Virgin Mary up to Joe Vitolo. And here are people visiting the shrine. It's still there today, in an empty lot on the Grand Concourse. What a great story. I think most religious scholars would agree with me that if the Mother of God is going to return, it would probably be by a desert or an ocean, but no, an empty lot on the Grand Concourse. And I spent a lot of time visiting the Bronx Zoo. Always loved feeding the elephants. This picture, by the way, was taken by an outstanding street photographer, Helen Levitt. And what's interesting about Helen Levitt, she used film. Back then, there was no digital photography. And the thing with digital, it's wonderful, but some of the images that you see, you don't know if they were manipulated in the computer room. So this is what Helen saw through her lens. And then I would always love to watch the zookeepers feeding the seals. This was my neighborhood theater, the RKO Chester, located on West Farms Road. So on Saturday at about noon, my friends and I would go into the RKO Chester. We paid 12 cents to get in. We saw a double feature, Coming Attractions, Flash Gordon, The Three Stooges, Bride of Frankenstein, a newsreel. And then we would exit the theater at about 5:30 p.m., walk across the street and buy a potato knish for 5 cents. One lady was telling me, she was in another part of the Bronx that I was not familiar with. She told me in her movie theater, parents were coming with baby strollers. They would park the baby stroller in the lobby, and above every baby stroller, there was a number. And then the people would go into the theater to watch the movie. If a baby started crying, the usher would come into the theater and say, baby, stroller number 5 crying, come get your baby. So my theaters didn't have any of that. Now also, in the Stardust, in the RKO Chester, there was a very famous ballroom up here. I'm gonna give you a few seconds to see if you can guess it. That ballroom was used in making the film Marty with Ernst Borgnine. Marty, what do you want to do tonight, Marty? You want to go to 72nd Street, Marty?
What do you say? Think we ought to give him a call? I'll take the skinny one.
Yeah, she maybe got a date already, Ange.
So we give him a ring. What can we lose?
I didn't like her. I don't feel like calling her up.
Oh, what do you feel like doing tonight?
I don't know, Ange.
So Marty got the Oscar for Best Actor in the 1955 film, and it won Best Picture. By the way, Borgnine was married to Ethel Merman. Borgnine was her 4th and last husband, and the marriage only lasted 38 days. Ethel Merman said, I'm a lover, not a fighter. And Red Buttons. His name was Aaron Schwatt. He attended Evander Childs High School in the Bronx. He lived on 176th Street and Marmion Avenue. His name wasn't Red Buttons. His name was Aaron Schwatt. He had red hair, and while he was attending Evander Charles High School, he worked as a bellhop at Ryan's Tavern in City Island. With a bellhop jacket, he had large buttons. That's how we get the name Red Buttons. And by the way, it was at Ryan's Tavern in City Island where Butterfield 8 with Elizabeth Taylor was filmed. And back then, they had gas wars. Gas, 27 cents a gallon. 27 cents a gallon for gas. You know, my mother always used to say to me, Marty, when are you going to get more gas? Get more gas. You know why she wanted me to get more gas? She was collecting glassware. This is the collection she got, glassware, from me getting gas. How about the good humor cyclist? He had a wooden box on top of his bicycle with dry ice inside. And then back then, you had a lot of rides going through your neighborhoods. What about the whip? You don't see this anymore. The Ferris wheel. How about the seltzer man? My parents had seltzer delivered once a week, and we used Fox's You Bet to make our own A-creams. How about the knife sharpener? Today, if your knife needs sharpening, you throw it out and just buy a new one. And the Iceman. My parents had an ice box on the windowsill in the kitchen, and once a week, the Iceman came. A half a cake of that ice weighed about 150 pounds, and they would take it up the steps, and the water would be dripping on the steps. What about the street organ grinder? He came with a monkey. They couldn't allow that today. The animal rights activists would never allow a monkey to be displayed in the street like that. Because of the animal rights activists, they eliminated elephants in the circus. And I love the circus. Every year I'd go to the circus with my parents, take the subway, and every year I went to the circus, I felt like I was 5 years old again. And they had some great elephants in that circus. One of the elephants they had was Jumbo the elephant. About a week after the Brooklyn Bridge opened, people were afraid to walk over the bridge. They thought it was going to collapse. So P.T. Barnum, the great showman, took Jumbo the elephant, leading 20 elephants across the Brooklyn Bridge to show the public that it was safe to walk over the Brooklyn Bridge. Zarro's Bakery in Parkchester. From what I understand, about 2 years ago, we reopened in Parkchester. It was founded in the Bronx in 1927 by Joseph Zarro, a Jewish immigrant from Poland. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor worked at Zarro's as a teenager. Uptown is Alexander's. Oh, I dreaded going there. My mother would wake me up about 7 o'clock in the morning. Marty will go to Alexander's. It was a battle scene. I can still remember two shoppers fighting over a marked down Dacron blouse. At one point, Alexander's generated more sales per square foot than any other department store in the world. And sometimes we go to Loman's. Oh, another battleground. Fordham Road and Jerome Avenue. They had no dressing rooms there. They had a community dressing room. My sister never liked changing at the community dressing room. What my sister would do, hide behind a rack of clothing as she was changing and putting on a garment, and my mother would be holding her personal belongings. Castle Hill Beach Club. I don't know why they called it a beach club. It didn't have a beach, but they had some great players playing handball here. And then while they were playing handball, there would be ladies sitting under the trees playing mahjong. But they had a great cafeteria. They probably had the best mashed potatoes in the world there. So when I went to the beach club, I would go to the cafeteria, eat the mashed potatoes, while the men were playing handball and the ladies were playing mahjong under the trees. Whetstone Drive-In in the Bronx. It was the most famous drive-in in New York City. It was torn down and now there's a multiplex theater there. But what's interesting about the drive-in theaters now, because of the pandemic, drive-in theaters are becoming very popular now throughout America. Beach shares. Oh, they were all lined up along Vice Avenue. And when I went outside, they'd all be staring at me. And I was very self-conscious about that. So what I used to do when I left my building, I would walk on the other side of the street. Not back then, not everyone owned a television. So people would be standing outside the stores watching a TV program. The common TV back then was a 10-inch RCA black and white TV. And back then there was no cable television. So every television had an antenna on the roof. And one of the greatest Americans of the 20th century, Lillian Wall. Lillian Wall still stands today at the Bronx Community College, which used to be the NYU campus. It's the Hall of Fame for Great Americans. Lillian Wall founded the first visiting nurse service in the world. And today it's called the Henry Street Settlement in the Lower East Side, serving the current immigrant. Milton Berle, Tuesday night, 8 to 9 o'clock at night, the Texaco hour. When he came on, many clubs and restaurants shut down when he came on. Good evening, ladies and germs. Not everyone owned a TV back then, so many people would set up theaters in their living rooms. The show was on 8 to 9 o'clock at night, and many people, when they watched his show, if they had to go to the bathroom, they would hold it in. So by 9:05 p.m., there was a drop in the reservoir. Milton Berle married his first wife a second time. And his friend said, why? He said, because she reminds me a lot of my first wife. Molly Goldberg, you, Mrs. Bloom, the patron saint of East Tremont Avenue, the Balabusta of the airwaves. You, Mrs. Bloom, was universal. She would get letters from paupers, millionaires, priests, pastors, rabbis, universal. She took stories from her apartment and put them into the stage apartment. Then what she did in her apartment on East Tremont Avenue, she would open up the door to the dumbwaiter. She would take those stories from the dumbwaiter and put them in the stage apartment. In an autobiography, she mentions that she started dating boys when she was 16 years old. If she went to a restaurant with a boy and she liked him, she would order an omelet. If she didn't like the boy, she would order lobster. Molly Goldberg projected East Tremont Avenue as the quintessential, windows open, door unlocked, Bronx apartment house. My dad and I, we love watching The Lone Ranger. That was our favorite program, The Lone Ranger. What's My Line? Moderated by John Daly. The panelists were Dorothy Kilgallen, Arlene Francis, Bennett Cerf, and every week they had a guest panelist. Here it was David Susskind. In 2013, TV Guide rated it number 9 in its list of the 60 greatest game shows ever on television. Back then, if your TV broke, you'd have a TV repairman come in and fix it. Today, if your television breaks, you throw it out, you go to Costco, and you buy a new one. Bernadette Castro. Her father, Bernard Castro, invented the Castro convertible, and I slept on a Castro convertible in our apartment on Vise Avenue. This commercial probably generated more sales than any other ad on TV. And Bernadette, from what I understand, is still alive. She became very involved in politics. At one time, she was on George Pataki's cabinet. The transistor radio, oh, that was like Velcro to me. Back then, the Yankees were in the World Series practically every year. And the games then were day games. Today, the World Series games are night games. I don't know, they can be going on to 1 in the morning. I don't know how children get up. But also, the World Series usually were on during the Jewish high holy days. So my friends and I would bring our transistor radios into the synagogue to get the score. And as we were getting the score, you see the elderly gentleman looking around trying to get the score. So it probably went something like this. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Yochvedi Ford just pitched a shutout, Adonai Echad. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu, Yogi Berra just a home run, Melech Elam. Baruch Adonai and Baruch Hank Bauer just hit a triple. So it probably went something like that. Saturday Evening Post. My mother was a subscriber to the Saturday Evening Post, loved it. It's still in business today, but it's having a difficult time competing with the internet. As you probably know, Norman Rockwell did a lot of covers for the Saturday Evening Post. I particularly like this cover, this illustration, because you have a young couple. It appears that they're in a diner, and it looks like they're involved in intimate conversation. Today, when I go into a diner in a restaurant and I see a husband or wife or a couple, one of them or both of them are looking at their smartphones. Well, that's not quality time. Or I'll see a wife and husband with their two children. The two kids are looking at their iPads. Again, that's not quality time. And here, this great, great cartoon, your toast is ready. The husband's looking at his newspaper, and the wife is upset that he's not paying attention to her. So she says, your toast is ready. The Grand Concourse, excuse me. The Grand Concourse, the Park Avenue of the Bronx, the Grand Boulevard. It opened in 1909. It was designed by a French architect, Louis Reis. Opened in 1909. That means the first residents of the Grand Concourse came from those deplorable conditions in the Lower East Side. They came from apartments where the apartments were designed primarily for profit, not comfort. No running water, no bathrooms, virtually no ventilation. Tuberculosis was rampant. They didn't have a blade of grass back then in the Lower East Side. So when they came up to the Grand Concourse, they could tell the whole world, I've made it in America, I've achieved the American dream. I'm living on the Grand Concourse with a sunk-in living room. Distances were measured by the Grand Concourse. Oh, I live right off the Grand Concourse. My business, it's just a block off the Grand Concourse. And then from the Grand Concourse, we get the great Yankee Stadium that opened in 1923. Opening day, John Sousa was the marching band opening day. The bleachers, listen to this now, 75 cents to see a doubleheader. They don't have double headers anymore. They don't think it's effective from the business standpoint. 75 cents. And back then, there was Ladies' Day on Fridays, 25 cents. And here now is the current Yankee Stadium. About 2 years ago, I took my two grandsons out to a game here. Parking, cost of the tickets, refreshments, it ran me about $300. And then with the Grand Concourse, we get the great Paradise Theater. It closed in 1963. It had a marble fountain inside with live goldfish. Here's the interior of the Paradise Theater, Baroque architecture. This was a movie palace. We're never going to see this again. It could seat 4,000 people. Another movie palace was Radio City Music Hall. In its early days, they showed films there. Never going to see this again. Today, people watch movies on Netflix or the internet. And then the balcony. Saturday night was date night at the Paradise Theater, and most dates would take their dates to the balcony. If a boy took a date out the first time, he would probably take her to a neighborhood theater. If he liked her, the second date, he would take her to the Paradise Theater, and they'd all head up to the balcony. And this is where a lot of people got their basic training on necking in this balcony. I can't imagine how many hickeys were produced in this balcony. I want to show you several films that I watched from this balcony. Oh, gee, look at that banana split. Wow, banana, real ice cream, chocolate syrup, whipped cream, topped with a maraschino cherry. You know, not too long ago, I tried out this low-calorie ice cream, Halo. It was awful. I mean, if you're going to have ice cream, have the real thing. Most doctors would agree that you can eat almost anything as long as it's in moderation. If the convict is going to be electrocuted and the day before he gets his last meal, he's not going to call up the warden and say, make sure I get low-calorie ice cream. And then sometimes we go to an ice cream parlor. How about Jan's? Jan's, they had the fake Tiffany lamps there. Now, Jan's was famous for a dish. Again, I'm going to wait a few seconds to see if you can guess the name of that dish. All right, get ready. Kitchen sink. It It was called Suicide a la Mode. It can feed 4 to 6 people. Some of my friends would eat the entire kitchen sink. And they would say, Marty, you get your own kitchen sink. Now, the Grand Concourse had a great collection of Art Deco buildings next to South Beach, Florida. And one of the great Art Deco buildings was the Fish Building, located on 165th Street and the Grand Concourse. The building is still standing. The Lewis Morris Building at 173rd Street in the Grand Concourse, this is where I had my tonsillectomy. They had a large group of doctors in this building. The Lewis Morris was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and he lived in the Lewis Morris section of the Bronx. Here's a quote from Robert Esnard, the deputy mayor of the Bronx. The people who lived in the Lewis Morris Building were the richest people in the world. Again, it had a great concentration of doctors. I used to go in the lobby there. In the lobby, I could smell the ether. And one time, I had an appointment with a doctor on the 3rd floor. I fell asleep in the elevator. And the Concourse Plaza Hotel, this is where the Yankees would have their World Series celebrations, where you had high-end weddings and bar mitzvahs. And today, the building is owned by the city of New York. It's a senior citizen residence. Chock full of nuts is at Heavenly Coffee. Better coffee a millionaire's money can't buy. Oh, I love this place. I really miss it. The cream cheese with the walnuts and whole wheat raisin bread and the whole wheat donuts. And their coffee was wonderful also. But I really miss chock full of nuts. About 10 years ago, they tried making a revival in Manhattan on 23rd Street. It's quite costly, but they closed down. It didn't last that long. Colin Powell grew up in the South Bronx, and in post-World War II, there was a baby boom. There was a baby equipment store, Sixers, S-I-C-K-S-E-R-S. They were located in Westchester and Fox. Most of their customers spoke Yiddish. And one day, the store was very crowded. So the man said to his son-in-law, look, go out and get more help. We need more help. So he goes outside and he sees a young African-American man. He said, young man, how would you like to make a little extra money? I need some help in the store. You want to work a little? The tall, lanky African-American boy smiled back, yes, sir, I'd like some work. Well, then let's get started. The boy followed his new employer into the store. But Colin Powell learned how to speak Yiddish very fluently. In fact, when some customers would come into the store and they spoke to the boss, they say, look, see that African-American boy, he speaks better Yiddish than I do. Here's Gloria and Howie getting ready for the prom at Morris High School. And then my friends and I would tell our dates, we're gonna take you to the orange room. That sounded very fashionable and expensive, but it wasn't expensive. The orange room was Nidix. They had that great orange drink. And then sometimes my friends and I would go to the roof of our building and sunbathe. Do you remember what that was called? Again, I'll give you a few seconds to guess. Tar Beach. It's interesting, this photo, because I get a lot of my photos from the internet. And when I went to Tar Beach, most of the people on the roof were naked. I couldn't show that on my lecture. So I finally got a gentleman wearing a bathing suit. Here's a White Castle drive-in theater by my high school, Fordham Road. Back then, the wealthy Italians would have their receptions in a catering hall. But many Italians would have the receptions in the back of a church, an Italian-American club, a social hall. So when I was about 20 years old, I was invited to an Italian wedding. I remember going there, and I had to climb up a long flight of steps. And I go into this room, it's a very large room, and a long table, and on the table, all these hero sandwiches. And sitting behind the table was a gentleman. He was called the quarterback. So let's say a guest wanted a ham and cheese sandwich. He would pick it out and throw it at them, and it was a hero sandwich. So he looked like he was throwing a football. That's where we get the term Italian football wedding. So the quarterback said to me, Marty, what kind of sandwich would you like? I said, I like a meatball parmesan. So he picked it up, threw it at me, but the guy next to me intercepted the sandwich. He took it from me. I couldn't believe it. I looked at him. He was a lot bigger than I was, so I wasn't going to mess with him. So I went to the quarterback and I said, look, give me a meatball parmesan sandwich, but don't throw it. So he handed it to me. I'm sitting there eating my sandwich, and now other sandwiches were being intercepted by other people. And then a fight broke out, and they called the police. And I got the hell out of there. I took the rest of my meatball parmesan sandwich, and I just got out of there. Johnny on a pony. You'd have eight boys jumping on the backs of the opposing team. The object was to break the pony by weight. And you would get a running start and then jump on the backs of the opposing team. You know, I played this game a lot, and it's amazing that my back is still intact. Jumping rope, double dutch. How about the chalk game? And hopscotch, or potsy. And this breakstone box was very valuable. Back then, like if you need a quarter of a pound of cream cheese, they would just scoop it out of a box, weigh it, and you'd buy it. But this box, when it was empty, was very valuable. Some people would use it as a planter. Some boys would take the breakstone box, turn it upside down, and put little holes in it. They were called cutouts. And then boys would take their small marbles called immies, and they would try to get it through the holes. If you got it through the holes, you can win a lot of marbles. But what some of the boys did, it was rigged. Some of the boys made the holes too small, so the immies could not fit through, and then they would just take their empty breakstone box to the next neighborhood. Tag him, Ringalivio, 1, 2, 3. How about the roller skate key? It had a vertical adjustment. Of course, today's roller skates don't have that feature. Stoop ball, 1 bounce single, 3 bounces triple, 4 or more home run. Opening the fire hydrant. And flipping baseball cards. So if you got the baseball card near the building line, you can win some cards. But if you got a waller, let's say a waller, then you can really win a lot of cards. So that was a popular street game in my neighborhood. Also, we traded baseball cards. Hank Greenberg was the most popular card in my neighborhood. Stickball. Stickball was the most controversial street game in the neighborhood. You took the broomstick from a broom and a pig's ball ding. First base was the front driver's tire. Second base was a manhole cover. Third base was the front passenger tire. If you hit the ball over 3 manhole covers, you were considered the Babe Ruth of stickball. We had to stop the game about every 45 seconds when a car came down the street. And then, again, it was very controversial because the number of windows were broken. So if the cops caught you, they would take the broomstick and just smash it in half, or the superintendent would take a knife and cut your pink Spalding. But this game was very important. We emulated the great baseball players at the time, and people would be sitting on their fire escapes. The fire escapes acted like the bleachers. Also, we did a lot of social networking with this game. Boys from other neighborhoods would come and join us. Today, many children do their social networking on the computer. Taft High School opened in 1941. I want to show you Taft High School because I want to tell you about 2 people that were in the graduating class of 1946. One, Stanley Kubrick, the great film director, Full Metal Jacket, Shining, and Clockwork Orange. And he was not a very good student. He would cut classes twice a week. He'd go to the Arcade of Fordham, the Arcade of Paradise. Not a really great student. He only studied hard in the subjects that he liked. And he always wore a raincoat and a hat in school, but a very good photographer. While he was attending Taft High School, he took pictures for Look magazine. And about 5 years ago, the City Museum of New York had an exhibit of the pictures that he took for Look, and they were wonderful. I attended the exhibit. I didn't realize he was such a great street photographer. So he was the official photographer for Taft High School. And he took this picture of the cheerleaders in 1945, and you can see he put his name in every picture that he took. And at that time, he was living on Shakespeare Avenue in the Bronx. Stanley Kubrick had occupied several different residences in the Bronx. So this lady here, Edie Gourmet, she was in 1946 graduating class, Edie Gourmet. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to all join in, Edie Gourmet, and singing Blame It on the... How about Charlotte Russe? Oh, Charlotte Russe, I love that. There was a store across the street from my building called Busy Bee, and that's where we would get our Charlotte Russe. So it was a paper cup filled with yellow cake and whipped cream, topped with a maraschino cherry. You would have to push it in from the bottom to get it out. About 7 or 8 years ago, my sister had a surprise birthday party in Pennsylvania. So I wanted to bring her a Charlotte Russe. So we went to one of the leading bakeries in Manhattan, and I asked the counter girl for Charlotte Russe. She told me Charlotte Russe was no longer working there. How about the Edsel, my first exposure to a lemon in an automobile, 1958 to 60. Look at those white walls. Ford lost about $250 million from the Edsel. Now, you know, today people want to take pictures of themselves. They use a smartphone. It's called a selfie, right? Selfie. And it could be a little dangerous. Some people have gotten killed taking selfies. They take it on a cliff somewhere and they fall over. Well, they didn't have selfies back then or smartphones. They had telephone booths. I love those telephone booths. Going to a telephone booth with my friend or a relative, and you would get the four poses. Look at that, for $1. How about Hojo's, Howard Johnson's? This was on Southern Boulevard. I love their pistachio ice cream. Now we're going to get to the candy store. Back then, all the candy stores were mom pa owned, mom pa. You don't see that today. They're all global. And the most popular item in my candy store was named Great Jake's, was the egg cream. I love the egg cream. I would take a long pretzel, cut in half, and dunk it in the egg cream. But I really liked my egg cream with a Lorna Doone. And my friends and I would be drinking egg creams with the jukebox on, listening to songs. And there were conversations. And those conversations led to relationships. Today, if you look in a Starbucks, not many people are talking to each other. Here's a typical scene in a Starbucks. Everyone's on this computer. And this was one of Einstein's biggest fears, that technology will replace human relationships. Some of the other things we got in my candy store, the button candy. How about Melrose? Wax lips, colored chalk, wax bottles, erasers, chocolate babies, gum reinforcements, pink Spalding, and Prince Albert in a can. You know, my friends and I, we used to call up the candy store and say, "Do you have Prince Albert in a can?" And he'd say, "Yes." And we would say, "Well, please let him out." And this was my favorite pastry shop, Artuso on Arthur Avenue. They're still in business, by the way. The great pastry. Vincent Artuso Sr. and 2 sisters and a brother left their native Italy and headed for America, settling on Arthur Avenue. When he returned from his service in World War II, he opened up Artuso Pastry Shop, still in business on Arthur Avenue. Freedom Land. Freedom Land was shaped like the map of the United States. Take me by the hand, take me to Freedom Land. It opened in 1960, closed in 64, went bankrupt. It couldn't compete with Disneyland in California, and today on its site is Co-op City. I want to tell you about this gentleman, Marty. He lived in my building of Rise in Tremont. He was about 7 or 8 years older than I was, but he was my big brother. If I had to discuss anything on a personal level, I would talk to Marty Slutsky. Then he was drafted into the Army during the Korean War. And one day I can still hear the crying and the screaming. He was killed in action in 1953 in the Korean conflict. About 10 years ago, I went to Washington, D.C. to the Vietnam Memorial, to the Korean Memorial, and there's a computer there, and I typed in his name, and out came the printout. What was devastating about it is that there was a plaque by the memorial, and it said, "We sacrificed our lives and died for a country and a people we never got to know." And that's exactly what's going on today with American soldiers who are up against a faceless jihadi, sacrificing their lives for a country and a people they'll never get to know. Here we have the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln was carved in the Bronx. The sculptor was Daniel Chester French, but he didn't do the stone carving. It was the Piccarelli brothers, 6 brothers from Italy, great stone carvers, who emigrated from Italy, set up their studio in the Bronx at 142nd Street. They occupied the entire block. So they carved Abraham Lincoln 1 block at a time. There were 28 blocks of marble. They carved Abraham Lincoln 1 block at a time. When all 28 blocks of marble were carved, they were shipped out to Washington, D.C. and put together without a floor. And then the Piccarelli brothers carved George Washington on the Washington Arch in Greenwich Village. So the Piccarelli brothers carved 2 of the greatest presidents in the United States. I wonder who's going to carve Donald Trump. And the Piccarelli brothers also carved the 2 lions in front of the New York. I had to take 2 buses to get there. Remember, they had a big sign that said no. And next to the word no were all the things we weren't allowed to do. So a friend of mine sent me an article not too long ago about Orchard Beach. Today, there are more hypodermic needles at Orchard Beach than there are people. And then I always love getting my coffee at Bigfoot's West Farms Road. They had these English muffins, and they really put a lot of butter on it, cheesecake, apple pie, and great, great rice pudding. Dion DiMucci grew up in the Belmont section of the Bronx, and of course he named his group Dion and the Belmonts. So here's a quote from Dion. "It was great. All the tenement buildings were built by my relatives. My grandmother would come down with a pot of hot water and soap and actually clean the stoops because the kids would sit on it." So he started the group Dion and the Belmonts. He belonged to a couple of gangs back then, the Fordham Daggers, and he was a member of the Fordham Daggers. They had a female division called the Daggerettes. And then he joined the Fordham Baldies. They were a tougher gang. In the back of his jacket, he had a picture of the American bald eagle, and they shaved their heads so the hair would not get in their eyes during a fight. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dion and the Belmonts, Run Around Sue. Construction of the Cross Bronx Expressway. It was the Cross Bronx Expressway that really led to the demise of the Bronx. It opened in 1972. We can thank Robert Moses for that. Robert Moses was the Park Commission in power for about 50 years. To this day, people don't understand how one man could be powerful, in power for so many years. An excellent book about him, The Power Broker by Robert Caro, C-A-R-O. Robert Caro is certainly one of the greatest biographers today. But it was the first highway that was built through a crowded urban neighborhood. Built through a crowded urban neighborhood. You can't do things like that. They displaced about 20,000 people. People got a notice. They had 90 days to vacate, 90 days. And most of these people were living in rent-controlled apartments. And this is during post-World War II when there was a shortage of apartments, so the landlords charged higher rents during a shortage of apartments. It was devastating. And all the businesses that remained on both sides of the expressway, they had to shut down because they lost their customers. And this was a travesty. And today, the Cross Bronx Expressway is one of the worst expressways in America. People travel 10, 20, 30 miles out of their way to avoid the Cross Bronx Expressway. Here's a quote from the New York Times. Few roads in America have histories as tortured as the Cross Bronx Expressway. The master builder, Robert Moses, placed the highway through crowded neighborhoods, displacing tens of thousands of people, and critics say, helping set the stage for the arson and crime that ravaged the borough for a generation. Set the stage for the arson. Those are the key words here. Because before they built the Cross Bronx Expressway, there were some bad people in the Bronx. There were drug dealers, pickpockets, other bad people, but they didn't set the stage for the arson and crime that ravaged the borough, but the Cross Bronx Expressway did. And here they are breaking ground for Co-op City. 80% of the first applications for apartments in Co-op City came from residents of the Grand Concourse. It was known as involuntary relocation. A lot of these people didn't want to leave. The Grand Concourse, that's where boys got bar mitzvahed. That's where children received their first communions. That's where you had high-end weddings on the Grand Concourse. That's where a lot of doctors had their practices. Involuntary relocation. The Bronx is burning. This is game 2 of the 1977 World Series at Yankee Stadium. And Howard Cosell was the announcer. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. The Bronx is burning. The Bronx is burning. So a number of landlords just burnt down their buildings, collected the insurance, and took off for Florida. So the culture in which I and many of you grew up in vanished. So you can take the boy out of the Bronx, but you can't take the Bronx out of the boy. So what I like to do now, I'd like to invite you into my candy store, Jake's, and listen to some of the songs that my friends and I listen to in Jake's. And once a week, the jukebox guy came, he would change songs, and my friends and I would listen to songs holding 8 creams, and it was a collective thing. Today, when you see young people or people listening to songs, they're all hooked onto their smartphones. It's an individual thing. Back then, it was a collective thing. So Jake's Candy Store could be anywhere in America. So I'd like you to sit back and enjoy some of the songs that my friends and I, and I'm sure you, listened to back in the Bronx. Chubby Checker, Limbo Party, includes my lecture. That's my email address there, and at the bottom is my Facebook link. I'd appreciate, an email, with some comments about the lecture. And now we're going to make the transition and go into a Q&A. So let me just make that change now. Yeah. Okay. So I just want to look at chat. Let me see what we have on chat. Let me see here. All right. We have, thank you, Marty. The 4 train. Yeah, the stadium is 161st Street. Okay. And from Jeff, my aunt went to Roosevelt High School. That's from Jeff, the operatic, to everyone. My aunt went to Roosevelt. From Larry, Lowe's Paradise was the most beautiful. The Lowe's Paradise was the most beautiful theater ever built. They're probably right about that. Certainly one of the most beautiful. From Heidi, saw Barbarella there. All right. And then, do you remember the Sweet Potato Man? No, I don't remember the Sweet Potato Man. I guess he didn't come down my block. My mom worked at Alexander's. Wow. If you have any pictures of your mom working at Alexander's, I'd love to see it. If you do, you can just email it to me. You have my email address. I'd love to see it. And then the original Loman's in Brooklyn, right, had lines in front entrance, and Mrs. Loman was over there. I didn't know that. Very interesting. I like that. And then Castle Beach Club had the best rice pudding. Okay, I'll go along with that. And then AM/FM. I lived off the Grand Concourse, close to Yankee Stadium. All right. Jan's Crumbs Bakery, yeah. Someone got it right, yeah. There was just a story about in the New York Times about Jan's. I missed it. I missed it. You have to tell me when it was. I missed that story. Yeah, you're right. And yeah, right.
Oh, today.
Beautiful
Corned beef.
good stuff here. I had a summer job surveying basements in the Bronx for potential use as a fallout shelter. Wow, in 61 and 62, right? Yeah, we went into every basement, including banks. Yeah, because then they had the threat of a nuclear attack. Yeah, very good. I like that. Some good stuff on chat here. Remember the shelter signs. Yeah, shelter signs, right? And this person graduated Pierce High School in 67. All right. Yeah. Right. My father was always getting calls about Prince Albert. Yeah. I was one of the people that probably called him. Will you take him out of the can? Out of the can. Very good. Yeah. And then that was before videotape. It was film, a TV tube. Yeah, well, the TVs had tubes then, sure. And then nobody's wearing a mask. Nobody's wearing a mask. Yeah. I thought that I had traveled on it before 72. My husband borrowed the butcher's car to practice. I have 2 pairs of skates using keys, if anyone wants them. All right. But I like that. My husband borrowed the butcher's car to practice. I love that. Really good stuff here. Can you say anything about the schools my parents went to? PS 58, no, I can't. Joseph Wade, no. Yeah, you know what you ought to do is Google it. If you Google the names of those schools, you might get information. Such great songs, yeah. Did you know New Tremont Palace, Burnside Avenue? Yeah, my parents' wedding was there at Burnside Caterers. In fact, there's something about Burnside Caterers. Number one, there was a great Chinese restaurant by that catering hall. Loved it. And then what my friends and I used to do, we would put on our suits and we would crash a wedding and go during the cocktail hour and eat the food at the cocktail hour and just leave. And then if someone asked us which side we were on, we'd say, oh, I'm on the bride's side, I'm on the groom's side, you know. We never got caught. Thank you for interesting entertainment series. Oh, some good stuff on chat. That's great. So does anyone have any Michelle, if you can send me a copy of that chat, I would really appreciate it. I can't do it as a co-host, but you can save it and just email it to me. I'd like to get that, okay?
Sure.
Stuff on chat. All right, does anyone have any questions? Any questions or comments? Yeah, here you go. All right, go ahead. Yeah. Any questions or comments?
I was wondering when last week's would be posted because we missed it, unfortunately.
What was that again? I'm sorry.
When will last week's program be posted? Because we unfortunately missed it.
I'm not entirely. I'm not sure who's talking, but I'm not entirely certain that we're able to post these to YouTube because of copyright. A lot of times, if there's music or footage, if it's archival photos only, we can. But when there's music and video clips, a lot of times we can't post to YouTube because of copyright.
I saw that the first one was posted.
It may not have been caught, but they sometimes will just take it down on us. So, but I'll check and see.
Okay, anyway, now you saw my email address. If any of you belong to any other groups or organizations, I offer 14 different lectures. So if you email me, I will send you my brochure with a listing of all the lectures on it. Okay, anyone else?
That's it. Thank you very much, Marty. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank
Wonderful.
you. You take care now. Everyone stay safe, all right? Stay safe.
You too.
Okay. And Michelle, I'll be speaking to you, okay?
Yes, Marty, I will talk to you soon.
Okay, you take care
Thanks
now.
so much.
Have a great day. All
You
right.
too.
Bye now. Bye.
Bye.